And we're live. And welcome everyone to another episode of Professional Novice with Ali Rizvi. My name is Ali Rizvi, and this is today. I have actually one of my favorite people, one of the smartest and the kindest people that I know. Sorry, I'm totally embarrassing you. My good friend Seth Andrews is on the show. Seth Andrews, hi, how are you?
Nice to cross paths. I don't get a chance to we don't get to be out on the circuit, for lack of a better word. We get a chance to actually sit down and
Yeah.
talk like real people. So when you said, "Hey, let's sit down and talk like real people, but we'll just do it online," I'm like, I'm in. Like, I didn't even ask what to prep for. I just said, "Okay, I'm in. Let's chat." So
Yeah, this is kind of it works. The whole purpose of this show is I was just telling you before is just for me to find people I really like talking to and just sit down and just talk to them and pretend there's no audience,
yeah.
And that's the most fun for me. So I'm gonna tell everybody who doesn't know, if there's anyone who's been living under a rock and doesn't know who you are and what you're all about. So Seth Andrews was a fundamentalist Christian for a while. He had a Christian. You'll notice from his very nice, sexy radio voice that he was a Christian radio host for 10 years. Today, he's a secular humanist and a very prominent atheist activist. He's based in Oklahoma, the deep red state. He is the author of an excellent book that I recommend highly to everyone called Confessions of a Former Fox News Christian. More relevant than ever now. I should mention, we did an interview with you and me and Armin on the Secular Jihadist podcast, which is my other main podcast. And we talked a lot about the book and the issues in it. So I definitely refer you to that. And this time, I think this conversation is going to be a little bit different. So there are many things I want to talk to you about, like especially your insights into the mindset of Fox News viewers and Trump supporters and fundamentalists, religious people, Christian people. But just wanted to start by saying, how are you feeling? I mean, we're in November. The election just happened. There's 4 years of this stuff that we lived through, and now it's over.
Yeah.
Well, quote unquote over. We'll talk about that a little bit. But how are you feeling, especially living in Oklahoma?
There's a sense of relief for me as a humanist, as a liberal, as somebody who sees the alarming rise of authoritarianism and the cult of personality and the rejection of basic decency in favor of cruelty and deceit and just mayhem. But I have a hard time celebrating. Like, I'm ready, and I do feel a sense of tempered optimism that things are, when I hear Biden put out a statement on Twitter that sounds like an adult in the room, love or hate him, he sounds like an adult in the room, and
Just
he's
not
using
weird.
the language of leadership, right?
Yeah.
And it's been so long since we've seen someone who isn't just ranting and freaking and blaming and all capsing and misspelling and lying and freaking nonstop. I mean, our window of normal has shifted so much. I'm not sure we as a culture have even realized how low we have allowed the bar to set. And so, I'm also, I kind of beat myself up for being so naive. First of all, I didn't think Trump could win in 2016. I thought, no way. And I was wrong about that. I mean, he lost the popular vote, but I get it. Then I thought, well, it's going to be so insane that after 6 months of this nonsense, people are going to say, no way, they've had enough. And he's going to get frustrated and stomp out and he won't finish his term. I was wrong about that. In fact, his popularity among his base seemed to even grow. No matter how more unhinged he became, the more they loved him. And now I'm at this point where, Ali, I'm waiting for what I call the tweet, right? He's already insightful and inflammatory, and he already uses loaded language, but I'm waiting for the tweet where he uses direct language to incite some kind of revolution. And many of his more extreme and armed followers do something dangerous. I don't think that's hyperbole. I think we see a culture that has been primed for authoritarianism. They see him as a savior anointed by God. They're convinced that the Democrats, many are convinced the Democrats are in league with Satan. Some say they're part of a satanic cabal of pedophiles bringing about the apocalypse, you know. And so if they think it's a holy war, what might they be capable of? So I've got some optimism, but I'm also still a little bit frightened. I don't know. Tell me, am I overreacting on that?
No, I don't think you're overreacting. I think, because this was the complacency that we got shaken out of. And this is something that I talk about. I mean, I was wondering about this. I noticed that, I had my case of Trump derangement syndrome. I own it, right? There are some disorders that are better than others. I mean, it's better than having hemorrhoids or pancreatic cancer. It's not as bad. You can talk about it in public. It's like a gluten allergy. You can kind of brag about it. Yeah, I got Trump derangement syndrome. It's but I really did, and I have, since he lost, and I know that one big. I know there's a lot more to do, but since we overcame that obstacle, I have been sleeping better. I'm also a parent. I have a 4-year-old daughter. So one thing that I saw on TV was Van Jones. I don't know if you saw that clip.
Yeah, where he broke down into tears.
He broke down into tears, and he was talking about how it's easier to be a parent. He said that, we are, and it was so simple and so truthful and, just so honest, where he said that telling the truth matters, right? Like, science matters. Being a good person, just being a good person matters. And this was, I think, one of the biggest wake-up calls for me, is that in the past, we had, I remember I used to tell my wife, it's like, well, George W. Bush, he still did what he thought was, I mean, he wasn't a bad guy, right? Yes, he was, you could say he's a war criminal. He surrounded himself with his dad's friends, but, from his point of view, he still, in his mind, tried to do what was right. And, Mitt Romney was not a bad person. I don't think these are bad people, but this is an objectively bad man, right? An objectively bad man, devoid of empathy, devoid of conscience, devoid of any kind of moral compass, just going with the flow, whatever helps him. I was thinking today about the vaccines that came out, the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine for COVID. And that's probably, I think, one of his greatest achievements. And I give him a lot of credit for that, but we know what the reason was. The reason is that he put billions of dollars into Operation Warp Speed so you could get a vaccine before the election. It was still for political purposes. It's there's a tiny, tiny chance that wasn't his intention, but who are we kidding? So there's just that makes a big difference to me. Like, I grew up in Libya, Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, all of these places where this kind of thing is relatively normal. It's normalized. You expect it. Nobody has high expectations from their leadership. There's rampant corruption. When I came to North America, and this is, I live in Canada. Half of my family we've got 4 siblings. 2 of my siblings live in the U.S. They're Americans. Their kids are American. And they live in swing states, Texas and Arizona. So this is something I kind of saw what my nieces and nephews were going to. And we're also, we're brown people. We're Pakistani. It's a Muslim family, relatively liberal Muslim family. And there are things that Van Jones was talking about that resonated with me. And I realized that that's not something a lot of my white friends felt. So even though we always rail against leftist identity politics, but I noticed that I'd normalized at least once or twice a week. There's somebody online that tells me to go back to my country, says, you don't even belong here, and go back to the shithole that you came from, and things like that. And I just brushed it off. It's not a big deal. And then I realized that actually is a big difference between what I saw, my experience of the last 4 years, versus somebody else who was really concerned about all of the other things he was doing that were, unconstitutional, or the impeachment and, all of those other issues. And they kind of think that, maybe the racism and bigotry, yeah, it's a thing, but, that's not the main issue. There are other main issues. But having been on the receiving end of it as somebody who has a different, comes from a different place and looks a little different, that was a really big thing for me. And I was kind of stunned to see that I'd normalized it. I think that's a harm of it. We just really normalized a lot of things in the last 4 years.
I'm interested in when I speak about the reality that we have a president, a lame duck president, who has lost the popular vote by, I guess we're pushing 6 million, and easily lost the electoral vote, even though it's not officially certified. But I mean, come on.
Yes, he's lost the election.
And he refuses to leave, right? And I say, do you consider this to be a crisis of democracy? Do you see it as a constitutional crisis and a moral crisis? And when they talk about Trump, it's so weird to see the deference, because if Obama had tried this, if Clinton had tried this, they would have just lost their minds. How dare he? This is our house. This is a sacred process. And instead, you saw this. They were so used to the clown show that their reasoning is, well, he's gonna leave. Well, okay, one of these days. I mean, he's not gonna. The military's not gonna have to go in and pull him out of. I mean, and I stopped. I thought to myself, these are the people, by the way, who don't think that the election is fake and it's going to be over, because those people, they're still out there. They think it's all a coup. And I'm not talking about the revolutionaries, but the other people who were like, oh yeah, come on. I mean, we all know we knew we wasn't going to go quietly, and they're okay with it because they're used to it. And again, I think it shows us how low the bar for our normal has become. This is going to take, I think, a long, long time to get out. And then I predicted, and a lot of people have predicted, that once they, drag him kicking and screaming out of there, he's going to either start his own political action committee, he's going to start a political party, he's going to start a news network that goes against Fox, he's going to maybe he'll start a right-wing radio show. Dear God, Jesus, imagine what that would sound like the word salad of Donald Trump on right-wing radio for 3 hours a day. He's going to do something, because the man cannot not be in the limelight. He is such a shell of a human being that without the constant adulation, I mean, why else would you rally 24/7, even after you've won the election for years? Because you need to hear the roar of the crowd to be able to feel somewhat complete. And without that sound, you're empty. So he's not going to be able to sit still. What's he going to do? Is he going to be the fly in the ointment who continues to try to stir the pot? And, the media, they're going to lap that shit up. Because let's face it, they're guilty of ratings and all that's wanting ratings. And part of me thinks that the worst thing we could do is just ignore the guy, right? Finally, he posts too many false or misleading Twitter posts, and so he's banned from Twitter. That'd be great. Then he goes to Parler. Nobody gives a shit. and the rest of us just ignore him. Right?
Yeah.
The rest of them just ignore him. I mean, that would be like him. It'd be like that scene in Superman 2 where they put him in the Phantom Zone and they send them into the abyss of the cosmos, never to be seen again. That would be the ultimate justice. Sadly, we know it's not going to happen. So,
yeah, there's it's a tough thing. I have and this is a conversation that I had with Armin as well, is that I think whenever I hear that, well, Trump is gone, but Trumpism is here to stay, I don't think Trumpism is scalable. Because what you're saying is that if Obama or Clinton had done something like this, if Romney or Bush had done something like this and refused to go, it would have been different too.
Yeah,
it's actually, this is uniquely a Trump phenomenon. I mean, the kind of things that he's gotten away with, asking Ukraine to investigate his political opponent, saying let's ban all Muslims from entering the country, like back in 2015 when he first proposed it. Like, it was stunning at the time that he said it, but nobody took it seriously because nobody thought he'd get elected. Saying that the thing that he said about the neo-Nazis, the not answering the question in a debate, right, about whether he rejects white supremacists, defending the size of his penis. Do you remember that in the And that's one of the things I'm thankful for. I'm just glad that video clip is out there because it always makes me laugh. But these kinds of things, I mean, you can take all of that and transpose it onto, say, Nikki Haley or some other candidate, Marco Rubio, and they would not get away with it. They would not get away with not releasing their tax returns. So I think this is one of those things, and I violate Godwin's law when I say this, but there are some people who are just cults of personality. And now, is he gonna, there's neo-Nazis nowadays too, but they still rally around that one guy. They still rally around that one guy. They don't have somebody else a leader like that who took the torch from him. They may be this kind of mindset out there in the future, but I don't think there's anybody else but him who can actually galvanize 70 million people to come out in support of him.
I think that Trump is, I think, a symptom of America as an entertainment culture. Just a matter of time. And we've already had actor in the White House with Ronald Reagan, hugely popular, et cetera. But he had become a politician, governor of California, et cetera, before he ever ascended to the presidency. So whether you love him or hate him, he wasn't just an entertainment president, but he knew the power of showmanship. But I mean, we live in a country which is gleefully illiterate about itself and the rest of the world. We don't know our own history. More than half of the people you speak to on the street can't name the vice president of the United States. That may be not the case during the election, but earlier this year, we're finding studies where people and name one Supreme Court justice. They know everything about the Kardashians, but they know nothing about what's happening in their own systems of government.
You asked them to define socialism. I remember you went out and asked these people to define, so they have no idea what socialism is.
We talk a lot about the Pledge of Allegiance, and as part of the Pledge of Allegiance, I actually will ask people, well, what's a republic? Because you just pledged an allegiance to it. And they just look around and go, I don't know. All right, well, you just pledged an allegiance. This is an important promise that you just made. This is the United States. So I think it probably was inevitable that we ended up with an entertainment president. I don't think Donald Trump is going to be the last. I think there will probably be somewhere down the pipe. I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime, but there will be somebody who sort of clicks that celebrity, household name, charismatic outsider, hey, what the hell kind of candidate, whatever he is, at least he's not a politician, which is one of the worst arguments for electing someone I've ever heard, right? Yeah, he's a malignant narcissist, predator, and sociopath, but at least he's not a politician. I'm sorry. The other one that drives me crazy, Ali, is when people try to tell me why Biden isn't a better choice because Biden is far from perfect. I think Biden was a terrible candidate. But, if it's a comparative race in a two-horse race, and it was, this is a no-brainer. I do think Biden is a compassionate man. I think he's much more of a humanist. I think the Democratic Party reflects humanistic values. We have a wider tent. We're not about empowering Christian nationalists. It's not about mandating a specific religion in violation of the Constitution. It's more xenophilic. It's more kind and accepting to the immigrant, the foreigner, etc. It's, on every level, this to me is a no-brainer. And I got people on my page pulling out 25-year-old Biden clips going, see, back in the 90s, he said this. And if that's all you got nothing. To me, this is not even close. So in that way, I'm curious to see how the transition's going to happen. Like, how is he going to do it? How are you going to get the one guy out to make room for the other guy? How's that going to happen? I don't know. I'm insanely curious to see what's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's not just the U.S. That's the entertainment culture. I think this is a global phenomenon. I mean,
really?
This is I see, as what you're saying with Trump. I truly believe that he is a cult of personality. It is something. It's more Trump than, ideologically, he's just haphazard. He's not anywhere. I mean, if you talk about conservatives and you grew up conservative, you grew up with conservatives, and you know that they're actually very big on defending certain fundamental constitutional institutions like freedom of the press and freedom of expression and there's some basic principles that or democracy, peaceful transition, right? A respect for the process, the electoral process, and these are all things like Russia, like
Well, and I think
Russia, like
I think
these
that
are these.
speaks. Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me, brother. Forgive me. I walked
No,
all over you there.
oh no,
Well,
I'll just complete it really quickly. Like, yeah, sorry, go ahead. There's a delay.
No.
So
I
it
thought
sounds
you
like
were done. There's a little bit of a delay, and I'm a host, and I can't shut my mouth. Please finish your
go
thought.
for it.
Well, I think many of the people have been primed for authoritarianism by religion. You think about Christianity specifically, all the major, Christianity and Islam, the two major Abrahamic religions. You have absolute fealty and loyalty to a savior / father figure. You then line up behind and give them pretty much carte blanche to do whatever they're doing because they have been anointed or appointed. And that is much of the mentality, at least here in red state Oklahoma. We see people, I mean, they are waving the in-group symbols of their savior, their Trump flags all over this place. And they are just fine with ignoring the rule of law, basic decency, etc., because in their mind, they have been charged by God to follow God's appointee or his chosen one. And sometimes the Lord uses terrible people to do great things, blah, blah, blah. But it's a way for them to sort of shut off the moral reasoning centers in their brain. Right. Well, at least he's not a Democrat. They're all Satanists. So we know that Trump is God's guy. So I'm just going to sort of let him do what he does. God has a plan. The Republican Party is the party of God. And, when you have a cad and con man who wraps himself in the flag waving a Bible, and you have a huge culture of people who are motivated by in-group symbols like that. I mean, there's a reason he holds up the Bible he does not read, standing in front of a church he does not attend, because whether or not he's a true Christian isn't the point. It was all about this sort of symbolic stand for their specific God. They're really willing to throw caution to the wind and ignore the rule of law because, hey, their guy has been chosen by a higher, greater power. And I found that an interesting social experiment or observation.
Yeah, I wanted to get to that. I mean, you've written the book, right? You've written Confessions of a Fox News Christian, all right? So again, I want to remind everybody, if you want to know about the book, and so that we had an excellent conversation with Seth on the Secular Jihadist podcast, so do check that out. If you are watching this, and if you're watching it on YouTube, please do click the subscribe button underneath. I've learned to say that now. This is the first time saying this. So everybody is telling me to say it. So please, do click the subscribe button so you can subscribe, and then also hit the bell so you get notifications. But anyway, I wanted to ask you, growing up, the way that you did, watching Fox News, your family watching Fox News, fundamentalist Christianity, and also living right now in Oklahoma, right? There's a lot of talk about how Trump did get still 73 million votes. Like the turnout was massive. So, the idea that he got more votes than any other president before, except Biden, who's leading him a lot. That it's kind of, it tells you some stuff, but it doesn't really tell you as much as people think it tells you because turnout was just really high. There's talk about reaching out to them and about healing the divide, and how do we approach and how do we make some kind of connection and find common ground with his supporters and find out what it was that drove them to support him and see if we can kind of fill whatever vacuum that is. Is that so? Living in a red state, I mean, I'm sure that you interact with many Trump supporters, or that at least you see it all around you, or that do you have family members or friends who are kind of who, if they're not Trump supporters themselves, they're associated with it. You're kind of surrounded by it. So, what do you think? What's your insight on the mindset? What are they all like? Did many of them just vote because they are just Republicans and conservatives and they don't like Trump? How many of them were actually his loyal base that would excuse him like shooting somebody on Fifth Avenue, like he said? What's your take on it?
It's funny. I remember having so many conversations in 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, trying to sort of logically and morally reason people through why Donald Trump is the antithesis of the best teachings of Jesus and hugely problematic for a Christian to support specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And I got no traction. I mean, none. It was a brick wall experience. And I got so exasperated and so jaded that then I shifted, and I don't know if it was the right thing to do, but in my own life, I gave up. I mean, I was like, fine, I'll vote through you. I'll push past you. I'm going to, in spite of you, work to build the world that I would like to see and to try to protect the Constitution and the rule of law. And so, because there was a cult allegiance, it was absolutely religious in nature, and their rationalizations ran the gamut. There were some people who bought into the outsider narrative, and that's all they needed to hear. He's not a politician. Some people didn't do any homework on his actual business history and bought the canard that he's a genius and wasn't actually a serial failure until reality TV rescued him. Tony Schwartz wrote The Art of the Deal for Donald Trump, came out later and said, I made the whole thing up. Buyer beware, the guy's a sociopath. That's the guy who wrote The Art of the Deal. There are other people who believe that everything Democrat is socialist, and they equate socialism with Satanism because it's part of a one world mechanism. One world governments mean the book of Revelation, the end times. It sounds like hyperbole, but especially the older generations who came out of the Cold War. It was the godly United States pitched against satanic socialist nations, communism in Mao's China, the USSR, etc. There's the abortion question. For this, I talked to somebody the other day. That was his only issue. Trump is anti-abortion. I believe that a life is created at the moment of conception. That is a soul. If you kill it, you murder a human being. That's my issue. I'm voting for the pro-life candidate. I mean, there's a ton of different reasons that people have rationalized their way through this particular choice. But, I don't have a magic bullet on this one, Ali. After a few years of banging my head against the wall and getting no traction, mostly I just gave up and said, fuck it. I'm going to do what I can do on my end, in spite of you. And you go over here to Parler or whatever claptrap you're in, and you guys can, you can sort of stew in the roiling cauldron of bigotry and ignorance. And I'm going to try to come over here. We're going to go do something else. I'm not proud of that, but that's kind of where I went,
Do you have people in your, say, social circle, family who are, so this is a question I'm curious about, is who are conservative / Republican, who you had good relationships with or have good relationships with, versus people who are Trumpian Republicans, and has there been a difference if you do?
Oh, almost everybody I know here is voted Trump and defends Trump. Our relation, I don't talk a lot of politics with my, the people I happen to see. Usually it's on an outdoor tennis court anymore because of, isolation. We don't really do anything else. But, my mother and father, our relationship hasn't been great anyway. I'm a profound disappointment having left the faith and being an atheist activist, et cetera. And, if I'm not sure which would be more scandalous, if the fact that I'm an atheist or that I voted for a Democrat, there would be probably a close race in that score. But I mean, I've still got relationships with a lot of people who are Republican. Do I find myself becoming more judgy? I'm like, what's wrong with you? I was talking to somebody the other night. I just have to tell this. I won't give his name. I was talking to somebody the other night. And he's like, well, I vote pro-life. I vote because abortion, once the sperm and the egg hook up, that's a human being. And somebody else was like, oh yeah, I'm anti-abortion. Yeah. And I'm just sitting there because I don't want to, it was like after a tennis match. I'm not here for that. Seth, what do you think? Oh, no, I'm good. I'm good. I'm just here to relax. No, Seth, what do you think? Oh, that's good. No, no, Seth, what do you think? And I looked at him. I said, you know what? It's none of your goddamn business. I said, it's not your business. It's not your pastor's business. It's not your church's business. It's not the government's business. Get your head out of somebody else's uterus. This is an extremely intimate and individual choice that has nothing to do with you. By the way, did you know that about half of all fertilized eggs are ejected from the female body without ever coming to full term? Meaning half of those souls that you are so worried about never actually become born babies, which would in fact make your intelligent designer, the Christian God, the most prolific abortion doctor of all time. And you could have heard a pin drop. I mean, this is probably, and I really do think that some of these people have never heard a cogent argument against their position in their lives ever. Yeah. They're in a reinforcement culture. They have no idea how the reproductive process works. Hell, I had to go get educated about it to find out what I was talking about. And so that may have been the first time that they saw somebody say something that they had to then chew on after the fact. I don't know. I spun off into oblivion, Ali. Did I remotely even graze the question that you asked me?
I think you did, because I was asking about how you reach out to them.
And I feel terrible. I'm in the changing minds business, right? My mind was changed. But, my mind only changed when I got to the point when I'd cracked the door open enough that I was not just sending, but I was willing to receive. The people that are shut down, that are absolutely brick walls, I don't spend any time on them. And that may be the wrong answer. Maybe I need to refocus and try to create a fissure there that we can get some reason through. But I became so frustrated that I was like, you know what? Fuck it. If you aren't interested at all in listening or learning, I'm going to go find somebody and have a conversation with someone who is, So that's just where I shake out.
One of the biggest insights that I've gotten in the last 4 years, I remember, 4 or 5 years ago, before the whole Trump thing, it just sounded so good when I think Sam Harris said, he's like, when you're presented with reason, then you are helpless. You have to accept what you're hearing because you're helpless in the face of reason. You can't argue against it. And the last 4 years, right, has just flown in the face of that thesis. Not only this, but even previous times in history when you've had demagogues. But I never lived through those times. I never really saw them up close. But I have found that when you talk to people and you try to reason with them, especially people who are religious, right, and I have a lot of religious people in my family. I, love them and care for them deeply and very close to many of them. But when you really get down to reasoning with people who are deeply religious, who think that having faith in something is a perfectly acceptable vehicle or just vehicle towards the truth, that's a perfectly acceptable way to get to the truth. They don't value, that the idea that you need evidence in order to be able to. They don't value reason, right? So you can't really use reason to get to somebody who doesn't value reason. So the question is, what do you do? And I noticed I started thinking a lot about how religions do it, because if you think about it, religions are by definition, the most unreasonable ideologies there are. Yet they still have a chokehold on minds of millions and millions, or billions of people around the world. And a lot of it is just storytelling, a coherent story. Like human beings, they like stories, they like art. They are in Christianity. You've got hymns and gospel choirs. You've got art all over the Vatican, and you've got a lot of the most amazing art and paintings. Everything have been Christianity related. In Islam, you've got the Adhan prayer call that rings out to billions of people 5 times a day. It's a song. It's actually a very alluring song. You have calligraphy. that it's written in. The way the Quran is recited is very musical. You've got architecture, Islamic architecture. All of these are the things that make people feel emotional. And I've given this example probably a million times about, when I grew up, we were all homophobic. And I think we're probably in around the same age group, born in the 70s or whatever. And we grew up, and homophobia was a norm. Everybody had a problem with gay people. It was, and there were op-eds and there were all these articles and books about, gay rights, and it would go back and forth. It was a two-sided debate. But eventually, the Ellen DeGeneres show and Will and Grace, and then the movie Philadelphia that came out, these fictional accounts of things where, you watched them and you cried and you felt for the characters and you empathized with them. It humanized them. And then people started coming out in our lives and we realized who they were, and they had stories, and those stories, right, and the emotion associated with it is what really changed minds ultimately. That is the way to get to, I think human beings. And when I look at someone like Hillary Clinton, who basically was a policy wonk and just bullet points, this is what I'm going to do, this is the right thing to do, it was all very reasonable, and she had very good policy points. On the other hand, you had a guy with a story. We're going to make America great again. We're going to build a wall. Mexico's going to pay for it. Those people aren't paying their fair share. We want to make them pay our fair share because we deserve it, goddamn. I mean, that's a story. That's something that you see on a TV show, and it riles you up. It brings out your emotions. And so I have really rethought completely this idea that reason is the best way to persuade people or to make your case, or, just having sort of left brain arguments is just not something that I think is even remotely as effective as doing it through an emotional appeal. And I'll say, I know I've been talking for a while, but I'll say one more thing is that with science, you see this. You see people who just talk about science in a very dry way. You've got journal articles, and nobody's really into science. Kids are not into science. When they do a degree in science, they have to go to the lab. They have to do the science. They can't just do an appreciation course in science. On the other hand, when you have somebody like Richard Dawkins, who writes a book like The Magic of Reality, and it brings that emotional element to it, and it brings the awe and the wonder of science to things. It popularizes science, what Neil deGrasse Tyson does, what Carl Sagan did. And they are storytellers. They're not just science educators. They're actual storytellers who use language and the power of emotional appeal to get to people and get people excited about something. And I realize I think that this is something that we in the secular and atheist movement, we put an overemphasis on reason and logic. We tend to, this is probably a bit of a void. It's something that is left wanting. I don't know what you think about that.
When I first started producing for The Thinking Atheist back in 2009, I took a lot of heat because I was using the emotive tools of storytelling. The way I edited video, the way we laid in evocative music and created these stories. There is less of it today, but there used to be this idea that everything that we do should be logical. We're all Mr. Spock, because emotion, that's a religious thing. And that's just crap. Emotion is a human thing. What I think they were resisting was many of them had been manipulated emotionally by religions. And so I've tried in my own activism to reframe that, where I think religions put emotions usually at the front of the train, right? It's experiential. You take it on faith, you move with the spirit, etc. Where we have our reasoning center, but emotion's part of it. It's okay to feel something about the things you think about, because that's part of the human experience. And I've found that we have gotten a little better at not apologizing for using sort of emotion in evocative ways. Ken Burns, the documentary filmmaker, talks about how all storytelling is manipulation. Well, okay, fine. But are you manipulating someone like you're moving them because you want something to strike them and you want them to have a reaction that is an honest one, or are you lying to them? You know, you can manipulate that without being disingenuous. And this is something that I think we still have a big learning curve. I think we have to stop surrendering feeling and emotion, human emotion, to the church. The church doesn't own it. They have misused it, taken advantage of it, but they do not own it. The other thing, and I will say this about changing minds, and this speaks to the relationship I have with my tennis friends. The one thing I have noticed that has helped to break down defenses and barriers has not been what I'm sitting there bullet pointing, but it's changing somebody's social circle. When I walk into a room, I don't say, I'm Seth, I'm an atheist, in a room full of religious people. I'm Seth. And we get to know each other, and it's nice to see you, and what do you like, and what are you about? No, you and Natalie are really fun, and let's go hang out, and blah, blah, blah. And they get to know me as a three-dimensional person, and they make a judgment on me based on the person, not the label. And so let's say, you know, sometime later, once we've developed a relational bond, and they've already sort of got buy-in to me because they like me, and it comes up that I'm an atheist, yeah, they're shocked, yeah, they're surprised, but they can no longer put me in a box. They don't see the label. And having me in their social circle opens them up to the idea that there are people out there who disagree with them about different perspectives, different ways of seeing the world, who approach life differently. And I have seen in my own circle, I have seen some minds expand. They become more accepting. They've become curious at the very least. I do still have, though, the frustration with the hardcore MAGAs. You know, that for me has been impenetrable. There must be better people than me, better debaters, better mind changers than me, because I had no traction in the last 4 years. It's maddening, Ollie. It's maddening.
No, what you said actually is something that's another big lesson I've learned in life in general. And when I wrote my book, right, and oh yeah, that I got to mention this anecdote for everybody who's listening, that one of the ways that I got to know Seth is that I had written a book called The Atheist Muslim, A Journey from Religion to Reason. And Seth had written a book, you know, just around the same time, maybe a couple of years before, called Deconverted, A Journey from Religion to Reason. So we had we had the same, we were thinking of the same way, you know, just in terms of our subtitles, and it is true.
That's totally cool. I love the idea. If somebody Google searches one, they might find the other. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, so it's great. So when I was writing it was the same kind of thing. What you're saying is that I had an experience in my life that, you know, I have a lot of Muslim friends. My family's Muslim, everything, and I have very good relationships with them. And I noticed that a lot of that had to do with, you know, there's just so much more to me than being an atheist or being secular. There's so many places where I connect with people on, and often it is many months later or even longer when they find out that, okay, you know, this guy's not an atheist, but we know him now. You know, I tell the story that I used to ask when I'd see these poll results. Right, the Pew would do a poll, and, you know, in all of these Muslim majority countries, where they'd ask, well, what do you think should happen to people who leave Islam? And like in Egypt, I think 80% of people, in Pakistan, 76% of people, something like that, would say they should be killed. Right, they're apostates. It should be punishable by death. And everybody quotes these, you know, polls all the time. Now, I've done the same thing with my extended family. I'd ask them, like, you know, what should happen if someone leaves Islam? And they say, well, yep, they should be punished with death. The punishment in Islam for that is execution. I'm like, but what about me? I left it. And you know what they say? They're like, no, but we know you. You know, not you're a good guy. Immediately. So it's like that. You know, you say, well, is it okay that the Prophet Muhammad married a 9-year-old girl? Like, no, that's terrible. No, they would defend it. They'd say, that is great. That's okay. It was different at that time. I'm like, well, what about your daughter? If somebody wanted, 53-year-old prophet came and wanted to, he's like, no, that's different. Yeah. So there is a theoretical way that people think when they believe, and then there is a personal, empathetic, human way. And that is actually a huge insight to me. And I noticed that when I wrote the book, a lot of it was my own personal experience growing up. The same thing I used to really enjoy Ramadan. I used to look forward to the food. I used to look forward to the parties, the Eid festivals. Talked about how much I thoroughly enjoyed that, and still do, actually. I still do all that stuff with my family. Um, and then once I had that buy-in and I locked down a connection with the reader or whoever I'm talking to based on the identity, right? That I've had the same experiences that you did. I found that I had the same doubts that you did. And then when I talk about the ideology and the beliefs, they're more receptive to it. Like that initial guard has come down. That connection has been established. So it's kind of similar to what you're saying, and I agree with you. That is when people do come up to you and they feel safer and more secure coming up and admitting to you that, you know what, I've also had doubts about this. I always wondered about this one verse in the Quran. And you find out that everybody has some issues with it that they were too scared to speak about, but they feel comfortable talking to you about it. So in a way, I mean, it's a much slower process. It's probably not that scalable because it depends a lot on personal lived experience. But I think that probably is the most effective way, is for people to humanize, these ideas in a way and see how.
I think too, beyond labels, we're all tribal. Human beings are naturally tribal.
Mm-hmm.
But, I know some beautiful Christians. I married a beautiful Christian.
Yeah.
And I know some atheists who I wouldn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. I mean, they're just toxic human beings, So, I used to be, when I first came out of the faith and became an atheist, I was like, oh, wow, I've joined the club of rationality, and they're rooted in, the goodness for goodness sake. And then you realize that people are people, for better and for worse. And I've lately tried to do more of a connection on the human level. In fact, I've had more conversations on my show. I talked to Grace Baldridge. She's a Christian documentary film producer, about some of the work she's done, and spoke to a believer on his broadcast. I'm about to release. I was on an atheist and Christian book club Zoom call where I was challenged for 2 hours by believers. We had a pleasant conversation, but they were kind, good people. By talking to them, they'd give you the shirt off their back. They're operating because they genuinely want good. I think they are victims of bad ideas. The theology, I think, is not necessary for their goodness, but at the end of the day, they're good people. And I take them over some atheists any day of the week. And I sure would like to see us try to maybe focus a little more on the interpersonal relationships wherever possible, cultivating relationships with good people, regardless of their label. And then we can get into our philosophies and theologies after that, once those relational bonds have been formed. I've gotten better at that over the past several years. I don't know. I've been less interested in labels, even atheist, which is weird for a guy who runs an atheist website.
Atheist Muslim.
You call yourself an agnostic? Are you a seeker? I don't care. Who cares? I mean, are you a good person living life honestly? And you said one thing, and I'll shut up after this, but you said one thing earlier that you were referring, I think, to a Sam Harris line. There's another quote, and I can't remember who said it. But it said, when an honest man learns that he is wrong, he will either cease to be wrong or he will cease to be honest. Mm-hmm. And I always thought that was a great line, and I cannot remember who said it. But there's a lot of truth that, if you're being honest with yourself and you realize that you're incorrect, you'll either improve your position or you will stop being honest about that position, even if it's self-deception. I thought that was a really good line.
No, that's a great line. It's absolutely true. Like I think that there's a lot there, but you're right about this. I think another thing in the last 4 years I've seen is, we were talking about this, is a lot of atheist people, we tended to think of atheists are rational, atheists are, they're liberal, they're humanists, everything, but they're actually turns out just as susceptible to, just dogmatic demagoguery as anybody else,
and intolerant in many cases of any in-group analysis and criticism. It's almost a heresy type thing.
Yeah, I've because I think that when you're going out and you're writing your book, you say your point of view, you're honest, and you're totally assertive about it. If you're on social media, you're saying whatever. We all talk about our opinions, but when I'm one-on-one with somebody, if I meet somebody in an elevator and start up a conversation, that's not the place, as you said. You don't walk into a room and say, "I'm Seth, an atheist." I'm atheist Seth or whatever. I mean, that's not the way that you go about things. One-on-one, I almost never interact with people that way. That's not how it is. When you're talking about ideas, public scale, you speak about the ideas. When you're talking to human beings, you have to respect people as human beings, whoever they are. And there is that tribalism. And I noticed that I did learn that, that tribalism, there's a lot of people who were born into Muslim families or born into Christian families and grew up still believing. They didn't have that epiphany to come out of it or anything like we did. A lot of times that's just a matter of chance. But, when you see the way that they conduct themselves, they tend to be a lot more reasonable than many of the sort of really dogmatic. By dogmatic, I don't mean faith dogmatic, but like the, especially with Trumpism. I mean, the actual antithesis of logic, of reason, of critical thinking, of the scientific method, of anything to do with civil liberties. I mean, one of the things that you're saying is that, when you hang out with people, you don't talk politics. You can be friends with people who support Trump. I found it tough, like just being on the receiving end of a lot of this, go back to your shithole country type stuff, is that when people said, well, I support Trump because, it's been good for my business. It's been good, for my taxes. But yes, he does all races and bigotry stuff. But to me, if someone is seeing that, that means that the racism and bigotry and all those people who say those things to me, that's not a deal breaker for them. It's okay. It's just secondary. It's not, it's not as important as my tax break or whatever. It's just like that, and that is still problematic to me. It's a tough thing, and the counterpoint to that is that I have, again, more people in my family as well who are Trump supporters. I mean, I think that the NPR had they in their exit polls, they showed that more than 1 in 3 Muslims voted for Trump. Right. So there are.
How's that possible?
This is the thing. It's a cult of personality. I mean, John Leguizamo said that, Latinos who vote for Trump, that's like roaches for Raid. Those are great lines. It's terrible, but this is what I mean by, I think, the cult of personality. One thing that, and it's a great answer to when people say, well, how can you be, if you left Islam, why are you so anti-Trump? Because he hates Muslims, which is one of the most breathtakingly stupid, connections I've ever heard of. Because to me, it's the same thing. I see Islamic apologists defend things that Muhammad has said that are terrible about women, for instance, saying, oh, he didn't really mean that. This is what he meant. This is not what that verse means. This is what the Quranic verses, and over here you've got Trump tweets. People who are Trump supporters, including atheists, they defend Trump's tweets like Islamic apologists defend like problematic Quran verses. Yeah. There's no difference. And they're both equally bad at spelling.
I heard Dale McGowan, who's a friend and humanist, he was saying that, sometimes the religion thing among relationships is easier to get past than the political thing because, religion is so often cultural. I mean, that's why we see a nation filled with people. I know Islam is loaded with illiteracy. I mean, you're taught to quote the Quran, but you're not really taught to really understand what you're doing. There's a lot of rote recitation and routine. And, I live in a country where Christianity means you own 3 Bibles and have no idea who wrote the book of Genesis. And you go to church a few times a year kind of thing, But, so it's kind of a cultural thing and religion you can get past. But politics, that speaks to our values. I mean, politics is personal.
It's contemporary. It's happening in real time.
That, I think, has made these conversations white hot in the last 4 years, especially. I think political divides are harder to get over than even religious ones because they really hit us where we live, what's important to us, what we love, what we despise, what we support, what we condemn. And it's been hard for me. I've locked some Trump supporters out of my circle. Quite frankly, they're bigots. They're being awful to other people. They're damaging the country I care about. They're spreading pseudoscience and conspiracy. I found them unreachable, unreasonable. And for my own mental health, I just said, fuck it. And, I sort of moved that chess piece off the table. I'm going to go and focus over here. You're not guaranteed a place on my Facebook wall. You're not guaranteed a place in my circle, in my life. If you're going to be an awful person, I just might show you the door. I don't have to abide it. And that's been another hard line I found myself drawing recently. I don't know if it's the right answer, but it's been what I have been doing in my own circle. I've had enough,
How do you feel about that? So, and I completely get it and I understand why, as well. Like I'm saying, for a lot of these people, these things are not deal breakers, and that's a problematic thing to me.
Yeah.
The fact that you don't just have different politics, but you're a bad person. Someone who voted for Mitt Romney just had different politics. It was an ideological divide. It wasn't a divide that was based on the kind of character, the kind of person you are.
Yeah. Look, I've got somebody who's a business owner. They voted for Trump specifically because they were worried about taxes and the overreach of government. And that's how they navigated through. In every other aspect of his life, the man is a gem of a human being. Okay. I'm not talking about that guy. I'm talking about the people who have seen the cruelty and bigotry and hate, and they now feel empowered to come out of the shadows. And that part of them has been brought to the surface. And this is their moment in the sun because their champion is in the White House. Those are the people that I've seen sort of emerge, whether it's on the family tree or elsewhere. And I just say, sorry, there's the door.
Yeah. Yeah. But so how do you feel about the fact that, when you're saying that a lot of these people you just gave up on, drew a hard line, cut them out of your life, and like, okay, I'm not going to talk to these people. I'm done. Right now, these are your fellow citizens. They're your fellow Americans. They're your fellow. I mean, you live in a red state. There's loads of them right where you are. They're your neighbors and, a lot of your friends and relatives. How do you feel about that, knowing that there were 73 million people who came out and voted for this guy? So there are. What do you do? Do you shut out? Is it all of them, or is it a minority? No. What is your speculation on that? Like, you can't shut out. Like,
no, I some of it I think has been, for my own sanity's sake, I will not position myself in an arena where I have to listen to Trump apologetics. And if I see people who are genuinely, they just lost their mind. I mean, I'm thinking of one person who shared a QAnon, wild QAnon thing, and they're big, the way they talk about gay people. My best friend is gay. This is personal. This is one of my favorite people in the universe. Those people I consider to be sort of bullhorns for constant toxicity. I do a cost benefit. What benefit do you bring to my life? What goodness do you bring? And if I can't think of anything, then I'm just fine with moving on to the next person. I'm not saying I want to live in an echo chamber. I'm not saying that I totally give up on everybody who is operating with bad ideas, but I am saying that sometimes I will come across people and I think, quite frankly, you are a net negative and life is short. I'm exhausted. I'm going to go focus my time, energy, attention, and resources where I think it can produce some good and where it won't drive me up the freaking wall. And, I'm thinking after the election, my battery recharges and I will be better about those things because I do believe discourse is the name of the game. That's how we change minds. I do think that we need to be humanizing and we need to try to be talking to and trying to break down barriers and do all the stuff that we're always talking about. But I'll tell you, a couple of years ago, I just ran out of gas. I just hit a wall and I've really struggled getting past it. I don't know. Does anybody else feel that? You ever just hit a wall and go, oh, I'm empty. I got nothing.
I have. But then what happens is that I hear I'm driving and I've got my XM CNN sort of thing on and or whatever it is. And I hear one of his speeches And it keeps going on. And even though I've heard it a million times, there's something that keeps me listening. Like I guess when I hear this guy's speeches, it for some reason it's compelling. I understand why it's compelling. I know it's all bullshit. I just understand why it's compelling. So
no, I'm the opposite. Like I can't even
Yeah.
hear the sound of his voice. I have to go read the transcript, which is a word salad, by the way. It's just like,
well,
oh
the transcripts are a lot less compelling for
you
sure.
see it in print form and you realize this is not a high functioning adult here. But when I see that smug thing that he does behind the podium and the cadence of his voice, the bile is coming up. I cannot stand it. So I can't. You're a better man than I am, brother.
I wanted to read something, just a description of something, and just have you think about it. I know that we're kind of coming up to an hour, so I'm not going to take much more of your time. But anyway, here it is. Quote, quote, "The fact is there is something deeply appealing about him. One feels it again when one sees his photographs. It is a pathetic dog-like face, the face of a man suffering under intolerable wrongs. In a rather more manly way, it reproduces the expression of innumerable pictures of Christ crucified, and there is little doubt that that is how he sees himself. The initial personal cause of his grievance against the universe can only be guessed at, but at any rate the grievance is here. He is the martyr, the victim, Prometheus chained to the rock, the self-sacrificing hero who fights single-handed against impossible odds. If he were killing a mouse, he would know how to make it seem like a dragon. Okay, one feels, as with Napoleon, that he is fighting against destiny, that he can't win, and yet he somehow deserves to. The attraction of such a pose is, of course, enormous. Half the films that one sees turn upon such theme." End quote. Have you heard that before?
No,
Do you know
I haven't heard that.
But does it sound relatable? It makes sense. This is from George Orwell's review of Mein Kampf in 1940.
Oh my God.
Yeah. He's talking about Hitler. So like it's just that classic sort of like demagogic, personality, and how they become the victim. And this is a guy who's a billionaire, obviously the most privileged person ever in the history of the presidency, yet somehow, everybody's out to get him. Everybody's lying about him. The FBI wants him, the CIA, the Democrats, his own Republicans, the judiciary, his own police force, everybody is out to victimize him.
Yeah.
It's a righteous thing. So
well, and some of that, again, I think roots back to Christianity, right? Christianity is primed for a persecution narrative. The best believers are persecuted for their belief. And I think this is often the case with Christian privilege in the United States. How in the world else can you explain people who have this amazing amount of religious latitude? They can come and go as they please, worship as they please, Christian broadcasting, radio, television, Christian apparel, jewelry. They get to, essentially do whatever they want religiously, but they always cry that they're under attack and that they are being persecuted. I think there is an empowerment going on there. I think it's a self-gratification, sort of a theological masturbation that's happening. Mm-hmm. And it's also a protective mechanism, because if they're crying persecution, then they are insulating themselves from criticism. They're deflecting back to the critic. And I think Trump is the epitome of this type of thing, right? I think, the more of a martyr he plays, no one's ever been as persecuted as he has been, except for perhaps Jesus. That feeds the hero narrative. It cultivates a false underdog narrative, and I think it taps into this sort of religious narrative of the persecuted faithful. And he's played that tune very, very well, I think, over the past half decade, for sure.
Yeah, I agree, and I hope. I mean, it's a good thing. I'll say again, I've been sleeping better. I'm a little bit. It's just weird. Like it matters. What the world is like. It really does matter. It matters that we have good people out there, that we have things that can make us feel hopeful. And at least for me, that's the case. I know a lot of people think that that's a little too wishy-washy, and but I don't care. I mean, that's something that I've always stood for. It's the whole reason I do all the work that I do. I think it's a lot of the reason why you do the work that you do. So these things are just personal to us. So it,
I mean, imagine hearing more of those messages laced with kindness and inclusion and optimism and expanding our tent. I mean, was it Biden who actually said the word transgender the other day? I mean, whoa, it was like historic. And I just think this is not a divisive attitude. These are the words, whether you think he's being a politician or not. We are a nation in desperate need of kindness, the condemnation of cruelty, and finding opportunities to de-escalate and sort of remember our shared humanity. That is the language of doing those things. And I'll tell you, the messaging that's come out of the Biden-Kamala Harris camp over the past several weeks, especially, have given me some optimism. I am sleeping a little better at night. I do feel like if we can get through January the 21st, that better days are ahead. And I'm excited. I'm genuinely excited to see what's going to happen next.
That's great. Yeah. I'm going to wrap this up. I want to finish up with a quote from one of our commenters. It's Leon Korteweg. So Leon Korteweg is he's from the Netherlands. He is actually also the most interesting people I know. He used to be a white nationalist. So that's the background that he comes from. He used to be a white nationalist, and we've had several episodes with him talking about his insights into that and how he de-radicalized himself. So he's saying, quote, "I agree with Seth. I also thought I had to shut down my emotions, but that's not the way to go. It's part of who we are and what we should use to get our message across. That's right. We lack stories, comprehensive stories that can be connected to policy changes. I'd like to focus the liberal story around progress, human rights, making things better. Expand on slogans such as consenting adults, love is love, marriage equality, my body, my choice, etc." And I completely agree with that. I think that's a great sentiment. And he is going to
like Leon. You should have, you know what? You should have been the guest today, Leon. Because
Leon is going to be. Oh, he's going to come on. Like I've been talking about it for a while. There's a time difference. So I have trouble scheduling it, especially nowadays. But he is going to be on, and he is going to be one of the most compelling people you're going to hear, because especially his story is incredible. Anyway, Seth, I'm going to wrap this up. I keep on gabbing, and because I want to keep you here for longer. It's just
it's good to hang out, brother.
Yeah, and we'll do this again. Thank you for joining me. And again, if you like what you hear, we've had several great conversations with great people in the past year or two. So there's a subscribe button if you're watching this on YouTube. Just click that, and the bell that apparently gives you notifications the next time we're going live. And go for that too, I guess. And then there's also going to be an iTunes, so go rate us on iTunes, and that'll be super appreciated. Seth, thank you. Confessions of a Fox News Christian, available on Amazon, right?
Oh, you're very kind. I appreciate the chance to hang out, brother. And you be safe up there in Canada. And when this all blows over, I'm buying. I don't know what I'm buying, but I'm buying.
Yeah. Okay? I was down in Oklahoma. I was actually in Oklahoma City for an event where I was speaking, but it was far away from. I think you were in.
Yeah, it's like 100 miles. Yeah.
Where you were, but the next time for sure. We
all
have to.
Brother. Well, you take care of yourself, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you too. Take care. All right, bye.